Okay. Michelle Carter is our presenter today. So excited to have her with us. She is an associate professor for the Carson College of Business at Washington State University, Pullman campus. She also holds the courtesy appointment of affiliate associate professor in the Information School at the University of Washington in Seattle. Michelle earned her PhD in Management Information Systems from Clemson University, South Carolina. She has taught MIS courses in traditional and online environments at undergraduate, master's, and doctoral levels. Michelle's research focuses on information technology's involvement in identity and social change, factors that shape IT usage behaviors, and information systems management. Her work has been accepted for publication in multiple prestigious journals. Michelle previously served as a senior editor for Information Technology and People, and currently serves as an associate editor for the Journal of the Association for Information Systems. She is chair of the Association for Information Systems Committee on Diversity and Inclusion, and a past president of the AIS Special Interest Group on Social Inclusion. In 2016, Michelle was recognized for her research and service contributions to the information systems field as a recipient of the AIS Early Career Award. Quite the bio. So it is my pleasure to turn the time over to Michelle. We're so excited to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Amber, and thanks so much for the Alumni Association for inviting me today. I really appreciate it. That was a great photo of me, by the way. So yeah, today what I want to do is I want to talk to you a bit about overcoming biases in the workplace. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully I will get things right, even though we've been on Zoom for the best part of 12 months. Technical hitches still occur, so bear with me. Let's get the right one. Okay. All right, so I think you're seeing the right screen. Okay, so I'm going to start with a story. When I was 15 years old, my family moved from the industrial northwest of England to the south of England. And the industrial northwest is very different from the south. In the north, it's full of terraced houses. One town leads to the next town, to the next town. There are lots of factories. In the summer, these factories shut down for 2 weeks and everyone goes to the seaside. Everyone in the town all leaves the town at the same time. So very close-knit communities up there. But in the south of England, that's kind of the part of England where I think most people who are from the United States or anywhere else think of when they think of England. It's London, it's the Queen, it's green fields, thatched cottages, and the white cliffs of Dover. And people in the north of England don't speak the same as people in the south of England, right? That British English that you're all used to hearing is not how I learned to talk. So I want to just give you a very brief snippet, if I can dredge up my memory of how I used to talk when I was 15 years old. See if I can do this. I'll give you a translation in a minute. So here we go. Hey, it were grand. We didn't mither, and we wanted for note. A reet, by gum, it's cracking flags outside. Is that what you want? So basically, to translate that, what that means is life was good. We wanted for nothing. Hello, it's good to see you. It's very hot outside. Is there anything I can do for you? Now, when I moved from the north of England to the south of England with that thick Lancashire accent, people didn't really understand me. But more importantly, people made assumptions about me based on the way I taught. So, for example, teachers, rather than putting me in the advanced classes that I was in when I was in the north of England, suddenly I found myself in remedial classes because teachers thought I needed to sort of show that I could keep up with my smoother talking peers. And this is an example of cognitive bias, those hidden beliefs that we hold that affect the way that we view other people and how we treat them. And that's what I want to talk to you about a bit today. So I'm using a different presentation thing instead of PowerPoint. So if it goes wrong, I hope you'll bear with me and not hold it against me. So what do I want to talk about? Well, I want to talk a little bit about what bias is, why it happens, when it's bad, how to spot our own biases, and how to overcome them. Okay. So what is bias? Well, you know, it's nothing more than the thinking shortcuts that our brains use to allow us to make decisions quickly, to size up situations and respond to things. So we learn our biases over a lifetime. We learn them through our education, through the cultures that we grow up in. We learn them through the experiences we have, and of course, through our upbringing. And all of these things lead us to develop our identities, lead us to prefer some things over other things. And so we don't have to spend all our time thinking. So what I want to say right off the bat, and you'll have to excuse me, my fight or flight response bias isn't kicking in right now and making me my mouth rather dry. The fight or flight response bias, by the way, an unconscious bias, that helps us is based on whether we feel safe or not, right? And so we don't have to wait and see if that tiger's going to eat us, right? We run. So we've been hearing a lot about biases, I think, recently in the news. And people are a little bit afraid of the term unconscious bias or implicit bias. And I think the reason for that is because we think that the word bias means that we're bad, right? If we are biased against, we think bias means being against things. Of course, bias can mean being for things too. But bias occurs because our brains have two different ways of thinking. We have what we call system one thinking, which is based on intuition and it's automatic. So when you're driving on the highway and that car swerves into your lane, you hit the brake without thinking about it. System two thinking, on the other hand, is what we rely on when we're driving home in the winter and the passes are blocked and we have to find another way around the mountains or find somewhere to stay for the night. System one thinking is very much driven by our emotions. So we're engaging in system one thinking when we feel that sense of pleasure, when we're checking on Facebook to see if people have liked our post. And the more likes that we get, the happier we feel. That's kind of system one thinking. It's system one thinking when we kind of curse at the person who swerved into our lane. And system one thinking allows us to do multiple things at one time, right? So I can have the TV on, I can cook dinner, I can check my emails, I can halfway listen to my spouse. System two thinking, which is not emotion-based, is based on reasoning, it's conscious, doesn't allow us to do multiple things. So when my spouse cottons on to the fact that I'm not listening and wants my attention, then I have to engage my system two thinking. And I can't pay attention to anything else at that point. So the biases that we have are not necessarily bad. Okay, there are some biases that are good. And in fact, some biases can be good and bad. One example would be something like pessimism bias. Pessimism bias is a bias that we have when thinking about future events, and we tend to overweight the likelihood of negative things happening. And when pessimism bias is good, what that allows us to do is it allows us to properly prepare for the future. Pessimism bias is bad when it stops us doing things because we think we're going to fail. So we just don't bother to try. Some biases cause us to help other people. One bias that we have is we tend to think that the help that other people give to us is more valuable than the help we give to them. And that creates a sense of indebtedness that makes us want to go that extra mile. So I hope I'm convincing you so far that the bias itself is not a bad thing, not something we should be afraid to talk about, and that it can be both useful, but it can also get in the way. So when is it problematic? It's problematic when we allow our system one thinking to take over, when we actually need to engage in some analytical reasoning. And it's problematic when our reliance on this system one thinking causes us to make snap judgments about people that influences the way we interact with them in a negative way. So here's some examples of cognitive bias. By the way, I do want to mention, just thinking about biases by the numbers, I'll give 3 numbers to you. 11 million, 40, and 175. 11 million is the number of pieces of information that Professor Timothy Wilson at University of Virginia says that we're attending to at any given moment. 40 is the number of pieces of information that we can actually attend to. So it's hardly surprising that 99% of the information we process through system one thinking, okay? So we're using these cognitive biases all of the time. Now, 175 is the other number I gave you. And that's the number of the number of cognitive biases that Wikipedia lists on its page. And if I was to sit here and talk to you about 175 different cognitive biases, we'd be here a long time and you'd probably get bored. So I'm only going to tell you about a few. Some that are, I think we're very familiar with, things like the halo effect. And the halo effect is where we take some positive characteristic that somebody has in one area of life, and then we apply it to another. So for example, maybe we think that tall men are going to be better leaders, or that attractive people are more knowledgeable than unattractive people. That's a halo effect. The opposite of that is what we call the horns effect. So halo, saint, horns, devil, right? So the horns effect happens when we think that some negative trait is going to carry over into some other situation. And, you know, people who are overweight often are victims of the horns effect, where people think, oh, this person who's overweight, then they're undisciplined, they're slovenly, they're lazy. And I remember once, some time ago, way back when Al Gore was running for president, so it is a few years ago, being out for dinner with my sister-in-law, and she's saying to us, oh, I don't know, I don't think I want to vote for Al Gore. He's overweight, so I don't think he'll make a good president. And it was like, wow, stunning. So that's an example of the horns effect. Now, this other one, outgroup homogeneity bias. That's what happens when we say, oh, they all look the same to me. What outgroup homogeneity bias is that we pay more attention to people who are like us, the characteristics of people who are like us, than the characteristics of people who are not. So we notice differences among people in our group, and we don't notice differences among people who are different. So we might think that everybody from Scandinavia is blonde-haired and blue-eyed, right? Scandinavians will tell you that's not true. And we often see this, right? We see this when people say that, oh, people from East Asia all look the same and things like that. That's an example of outgroup homogeneity bias. The other one that comes up an awful lot is attribution error. And attribution error occurs when when somebody does something wrong, and we look at what they've done wrong and we think, well, what is it about this person? What characteristic of this person caused them to make that mistake? But if we were to make a mistake, we look around to the environment and say, what was it about what was happening today that made me make a mistake? So we're much more forgiving of ourselves than we are of other people. Now, the final one I want to bring up here, I want to bring this one up, bizarreness bias, because right now we're living through a time where we're hearing an awful lot about conspiracy theories, and people are very polarized in terms of the information that they're paying attention to and things. And it's very easy to say, how on earth can someone believe that thing? That's just ridiculous. Well, the reason that people believe things that other people find ridiculous is because of bizarreness bias. We are much more likely to pay attention to information that's unusual or extreme than information that is ordinary. So often the truth of things is very ordinary, very banal. But conspiracy theories are not. Conspiracy theories excite people's imagination, so they stick with people and people start to believe them. That's what makes them so difficult to overcome. So in the workplace, the problem with cognitive biases is that this over-reliance on system one thinking to process 99% of information means that our thinking becomes distorted, right? We think that the information, we think that these heuristics that we have are just as valid, just as valuable as taking time to reason things out. And of course, they're not. And it distorts our thinking. And it causes us to form bad judgments about things and make bad decisions. So we become prejudiced against people who are not like us, or based on stereotypes that we have created about people. And these prejudices and these stereotypes that we hold cause us to discriminate against people based on these negative stereotypes. And that leads to an unfriendly workplace. So I just want to say that, cognitive biases are everywhere, okay? It's not just in the workplace. Of course, they're there in the workplace. We see it in hiring decisions. We see it when people are in meetings and some people get listened to and other people don't. We hear lots of examples and have done over the last year or two, particularly in law enforcement. In the classroom, in Sweden, there was a study in Sweden that showed that teachers were more likely to give higher grades to Swedish students than people who came from somewhere else. A study in a university of psychology students showed that psychology students gave higher student evaluations to young male professors than to older male professors and to women. In the courtroom, bias in the courtroom has been shown to influence how African Americans are treated right the way through the judicial system. And it's an uncomfortable thing to think about that, but it's also been shown to be true. And in the hospital, and this is where it gets kind of dangerous, when doctors' biases cause them not to prescribe life-saving treatments to a group of people that they otherwise would prescribe to another group. So it's not just confined to the workplace. It's not something that is inherently bad. It's not something that we should feel like we're immune from. And it's not something that we should be afraid to have a look at in ourselves either. Employers need to know that because cognitive biases are everywhere, cognitive biases are perfectly normal in the workplace. What actually makes cognitive biases bad is when we lack awareness about them, right? So when we're just allowing the system one thinking to go unchecked. And it's that lack of awareness that influences our decisions and can negatively impact others. So what do we need to do about this? We need to become more aware. And I want to give you another story from my own life. When I was doing a master's in computer science back in the UK, there were 50 people in our cohort of students, and only 3 of us were women. And there was one man in particular in the cohort that I really didn't like. He was loud. He was very confident. He always seemed to lead conversations. He always seemed to have an opinion about things. And I avoided him. I avoided him because I really, really didn't like him. I really didn't like him from the very first day that I met him. And over the course of this program, this feeling that I had to him, it didn't go away. It just grew until I kept saying to myself, what is it? What is the thing about this man that is really, really bothering me? What is this? I can't stand him. So what is he doing wrong? And then one day, as I'm having this conversation with myself, as we do from time to time, I thought, oh, hang on a minute. It's not about him. It's about me. What is it about me that I am acting this way? I'm responding this way to this man. And I realized that what I was responding to was I was responding to being one of only 3 women in a group of 50 people. And that this man, to me, seemed to epitomize the 47 men in the group that I thought were all very sure of themselves and knew what they were doing. And I thought that they would clearly see that I wasn't sure of myself. And so I was projecting all of my insecurity about my place in that group onto this one person who was, for me, representing all of them. Now, what was interesting about this story is that on graduation day, this guy came over to me, and just before we were going to go our separate ways, and he said, Michelle, I want to tell you something. I want to tell you that over the past 2 years, I've been watching you. I've been benchmarking myself against you because you always seem so confident. You always seem to know what you're doing. You seem so sure of your place in this cohort and what you want to get out of the program. And so I've been less sure about myself. And because I've been less sure about myself, every time we've had an assignment, I've wanted to know what your grade was so that I could see if I'm doing well. Well, that was a bit of a shock to me. I mean, I kind of liked it, to be fair, but this was an example where on one hand, my biases were causing me to have a negative feeling and actually were negatively impacting my experience in that course by causing me to withdraw and kind of retreat from somebody. And his biases were causing him to, and motivating him to do better. So one of us was using our biases better than the other. I just thought I'd share that. So what can you do, right? We don't like as human beings to challenge our biases. We don't. Our biases give us this mental model of the world that gives us our sense of security. Okay, and it's uncomfortable. It's really, really uncomfortable to be confronted by being wrong. We don't like to be wrong. And so the first step in addressing our own biases is first of all to be aware of them, to actually examine our biases, right? So when we are thinking about something that we think, and we find ourselves going into that kind of stereotyping or making a snap decision, that we become more aware of it, okay? Because the first step to doing something about it is to become aware. And if we are aware of the biases, then we can think about, well, how is this playing out in the workplace, for example? We also need to broaden our viewpoint a little bit, okay? So what do I mean by broadening our viewpoint? We really do want to try and educate ourselves into thinking just how many biases might I have, right? I mean, how about the patterns of my decision making? Am I somebody who makes decisions in the same kind of way all the time? Do I tend to make snap decisions? Do I tend to want to act on things quickly? Or am I someone who resists making decisions? One example, maybe we haven't all been there, but I sometimes feel like we have. Imagine you want to buy a car or go on holiday or go and treat yourself to a new wardrobe or something like that. And you're trying to weigh up whether this is a good idea or not. Usually, when we're trying to weigh up whether we should do something, we already have an outcome in mind, right? So if I want to buy a new car, even if I sit down and I pretend to write out a budget to see if I can afford the new car, if that's the outcome that I want, then I'm going to massage my figures in such a way as to make it seem more affordable to me. So how we make decisions, breaking those patterns, one of the things we can do is we can talk to other people. We can invite other people to tell us what they would do, and not just invite people who think the same way that we do, right? Because that would defeat the object. So asking somebody, if you're a person who makes snap decisions, asking someone who seems slow to make decisions about what they would do seems like a pretty good tactic. So we become aware, we identify our biases, we think about what impact that these will have on us. But once we've done that, what else can we do? How can we change things for ourselves? Okay, well, there are some things we can do, some practical things, but you have to bear in mind that we spent a lifetime developing these biases. So changing our biases is not something that can happen quickly. And just becoming aware of our biases by taking some kind of implicit bias awareness test is not going to help us overcome them, right? It might have the opposite effect. It might make us feel bad about ourselves, so we don't want to do something. So one thing to do, first of all, is to view biases from a positive standpoint, as a learning opportunity, as a way of growing in our lives. So increasing contact with people who are different from you, right? We tend to spend time with people who are like us. We don't change our biases by spending time with people who are like us. We don't learn new ways of seeing the world from spending time with people who are like us. We start to engage in groupthink. We get more and more entrenched in our own positions if the only people that we're paying attention to are people who see the world exactly the same way that we do. So actively seeking out people who are different to us is one way of acting to overcome our biases. The other thing we can do, these stereotypes that we've built up, how many stereotypes that we've built up are genuinely positive? I'm going to just say some words to you. And I'd like you to think about what is it you see in your mind when I say these words? Nurse, construction worker, professor, librarian. How many of you, when I said the word nurse, saw a woman? How many of you, when I said construction worker, saw a man wearing boots and a hard hat, right? How many people saw a librarian who was a woman wearing glasses? And how many immediately went to, when I said professor, went to a man, even though I'm a professor giving you this presentation? I do it too. I do it too. I have friends who are LGBTQ. If I see somebody, a woman who has children, I automatically assume that she's heterosexual. We do, this is what we do. It's not necessarily bad. But remember that these stereotypes often get in the way of our decision-making, right? So if we have negative stereotypes about people, then one thing we can do, and we can use this to our advantage, is we tend to wait. We can actually, our brains will allow us to incorporate new data over old data, right? So we may have this old information, and then something good happens in our life, and we can replace our old memories with new ones. We can use this to our advantage. So if we are seeing that we're stereotyping people, we can actually act to change those stereotypes. We can make a conscious effort to see good things, right? So instead of thinking to ourselves, oh, my Asian colleague is Asian, therefore my Asian colleague who's just been employed because they're good at writing, that I'm going to take my math problem to them. Maybe we won't do that. Maybe we can go to our Asian colleague and find out about, take some tips from them on how to write better. So thinking positively, thinking of, and seeking out the positive characteristics in people who we've negatively stereotyped over years. Third, be specific, be intentional about addressing your unconscious biases. If I say, I'm going to lose weight, I'm not as likely to be successful as if I say I'm going to lose weight by cutting out desserts. So when we're addressing our implicit biases, be specific about the biases we really want to address. Is there one bias that tends to get in the way? Is it a pattern of decision-making that leads us to be in the same place over and over again, right? Is there one thing that we can start with that we recognize in ourselves that gets in the way of us achieving what we want to achieve? And then finally, change the way you do things. These stereotypes, this system one thinking, all of these biases, the reason that they're sustained is because we do things the same way over and over and over again. And every time we do the things the same way, we think the same way. We are habitual in our behaviors, and our habitual behaviors create the environment that allow our stereotypes, our prejudices to thrive, and our cognitive biases. Changing the way that we do things, seeking out new things to do, will open up our minds to things. And so we'll start to see things differently. So those are 4 things that you can do, that you can start to do with some intention from today. I think I might start, because in actually preparing for this presentation, one thing that I've become very aware of is my tendency to make decisions and very, very quickly. So I guess I won't be getting that new car for a few months after all. So all of this is to say, and I hope I'm left enough time for some questions and things here, is, does any of this matter, really? Do we need to do this? Well, in a word, yes. Companies are negatively affected by cognitive biases in the workplace. Groupthink, when people all start getting together and thinking things the same way, gets in the way of innovation. Discrimination creates a toxic work environment and negatively affects the culture of an organization. So for organizations who are looking to diversify their employees and sort of benefit from having a more diverse workforce, companies need to be aware of the subtle ways that when they're hiring, they end up going out and hiring the same people. And I'll give you one example. If you decide in your job adverts that what you're going to do is make an intentional effort to highlight diversity, and you bring in candidates who don't look like everybody else in the company. So you bring in women when most of the people are men, or you bring in people who, African-American people, or people who are Hispanic, or different other groups of people. One of the things that happens, because we're still looking for people who are a bit like us, is we do that, but then companies tend to hire people who are women or Black or Hispanic or some other ethnic group who've had the same educational background, who've grown up in the same culture. So it's more than just one characteristic that you have to be aware of, one box that you have to tick in hiring if you really want to benefit from diversity. And what about us? What about how we thrive in the workplace? Well, if our biases lead us to unintentionally discriminating against people, then that's going to affect our relationships with people, right? If it leads us, if we're making snap decisions based on how we see other people. If we're not listening to people because we don't think that that person has anything worthwhile to say, then we're not getting the most out of our working relationships. And if we make snap decisions that are bad decisions, then that's going to stop us from getting promoted or having the kind of career we want. So overcoming biases in the workplace, being intentional about trying to overcome our own biases in the workplace, but in life, is only going to make us happier. It's only going to make our life more interesting and more fulfilling. That's what I have to offer you. So I deliberately tried to leave a few minutes for questions, and I hope that I hope there is some. Please do forgive my my fight or flight dry mouth in all of this. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you all, and I really appreciate you all coming out to listen to this.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Michelle. That was a really great presentation. I think I see someone raising their hand for a question. Is that Yafeng? Is that you? Would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Can I stop sharing so that I can
Yes.
see people? Thank you.
Hey, Michelle, first, I want to thank you for delivering such a great presentation. It's very insightful, provides a lot of information about bias. So I do have a question regarding how to kind of like, how to make sure you overcome your own bias, and at the same time, if you get involved in some conflict with your colleagues, how to make sure the other people, other part also aware of they also have a bias.
Yeah, that's a really excellent question, Fong, because one of the things that happens, right, is we respond to, we see people making decisions, right, that are biased. We see that all the time. And so what do we do about that? Do we walk away and stew on the fact that this has happened? Yeah, we do. That's what we tend to do, right? We tend to go home and we talk to our spouses or our significant others and say, God, you won't believe what this person did today. The thing is, we don't understand why. We don't understand why they see things the way they do, right? And we fail to actually talk to them. And our tendency is to let our own biases kick in. Instead of kind of approaching people and saying, hey, you know what, I'm really interested in that decision that you made there. I really want to, understand how you came to that decision. And trying to see what it was that made them think that way. And I think if we can just start to open ourselves up to constructive conversations, then that will help. Now, I know it's not easy. It's actually very easy for me to sit here and say that to you guys, right? And
but I mean, that's a really helpful suggestion. Talking pen and talk to the other part, so may help solve this problem. Yeah, thank you.
All right, good. Anybody else?
I have a question.
And I want you all to know that I'm not coming at this as somebody who is who's not got my fair share of cognitive biases, by the way. I have plenty. And I am someone who's just as guilty as anybody else of walking away from a meeting and complaining about a colleague because they didn't understand what it was like to be a woman. So don't think that I am immune to my own biases.
Michelle, if I wanted to identify my own personal biases, where do you think I should start? Where's a good place to start?
I think a good place to start is when you feel yourself having kind of like a knee-jerk reaction to something, right? Do you always respond to certain things the same way, to certain people the same way? I used to work in London, and sometimes I was there late at night, and I was walking from the office to the train station, and I would assume, I'd be walking along, and if I saw some men walking towards me, I would cross the street. Now that you could see that as a fairly sensible fight or flight response, except this was in the middle of a city where there were other people around. And actually what it was my bias saying, these men are not safe, right? And so I had to kind of say to myself, tell myself it's safe in order to overcome that. So I think start with the things that you find that are most obvious to you, whether it is my own tendency to want to make decisions that have the outcomes that I want them to have before, and having to make myself not make decisions and put them off in order to break that pattern, or whether it's a group, are there other things, do you think, the certain decisions and things that you, patterns of decision making that you recognize in yourself that you might share, that you feel able to share?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think what you talked about earlier, someone will do something and then I kind of attribute that to other facets of their work, or say, well, they'll always do that thing. So maybe that's a good place to start. Maybe I just identified one.
Right? I mean, because how is it that when I make a mistake, how is it that I go, oh, well, I'm stressed, there's too much work I've got to do. I was rushing around. There's all of these other things. But if you make a mistake, it's like, why weren't you paying attention? Mm-hmm. So maybe I could find out a little bit more about what was going on in your environment, right? That's one really great place to start, where we can have a much more productive work environment if we only just did that one thing. So Abdullah is asking a question about what way can we set up a work environment that the problem of bias doesn't arise? Well, I think, Abdullah, the first thing to recognize is that given that we are processing 11 million bits of information at any given time, and we only can actually deal with 40, we have to recognize that bias is useful, right? That it's not always bad, and it is always going to exist. I think promoting an environment where people are more aware of why they're making decisions and why they see things a certain way is a good idea. I'm a bit, I won't say that I'm against things like these kind of implicit bias tests and things. I think they're useful. I think where they stop being useful is where people feel like when they've done them, they feel kind of like judged, right? I think if we sort of take the value judgment out of things and recognize biases for what they are as a useful tool, to help us sort of deal with the world, then maybe we can approach our biases and each other in a much more rational way. So maybe that's it, being rational about our biases. Because I think our reaction to hearing about implicit biases is emotional. So let's take the emotion out.
I understand now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. And Sylvia, I think, has a question.
Yeah, mine was just a curious question. So for the male student that you say you didn't like, did you ever disclose to them what your feelings about them was, and what was their reaction to that?
I'm trying to think, did I tell them that my feelings about them? I'm not sure that I did, because I think I realized my feelings about this guy kind of relatively early on in the program, and I don't mean within weeks. I mean within the first kind of year. And once I realized that it was me and my biases, and it was actually that I was the problem. And the fact is, you actually raise a really important point, Sylvia, because he didn't know, right? That's another bias we have. we assume that everyone knows what we're thinking and feeling, right? Because we feel it, we're thinking it, we're feeling it, therefore other people are aware of it. And they're not. They're not aware because we're anchored in ourselves and they're anchored in themselves. So actually, if I told him, I think he would have been shocked and completely stunned. And I don't know what he would have done with that information. So probably best I kept it to myself.
I
But
figured
good
it could have
question.
been a learning moment for them as well. So yeah.
Yeah. Except, I know. But I mean, except, you know, I would probably have been saying to him, you know, here's what, you know, we do this thing, right? We hear it a lot in therapy and stuff, right? That the way we approach our conversations with people is to say, when you do that thing, this is how I feel, right? So it always starts with when you do that thing. And I'd like to challenge that and say, I'd like to challenge it from the point of view of, I feel this thing when I hear you do, when I see you do that. Why is that? Right? I'd like to kind of bring these thoughts, since we can't get people to actually know what's going on in our hearts and minds, we have to do the work ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Wendy's saying spider sense seems to be triggered by bias. Yes, yes. Yeah, our intuition, right? People who actually who congratulate themselves on being very, very intuitive. You know, those people are relying on their system one thinking quite a lot, right? And sometimes, you know, they're right. And, you know, quite often some people just seem very intuitive. And, you know, if we are looking at people and thinking, well, that's a very intuitive person and they seem to be right a lot of the time, maybe we're forgiving them all the times when they're not, when their intuition kind of goes awry, because it will.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sylvia.
Sume, you're unmuted. Did you have a question?
Oh yeah, thank you. So
Hi, Shirley.
so I have one question. You talked lots about how we conquer our own unconscious bias. So if sometimes we find we kind of get biased by others, and then, you know, in that kind of situation, is there a way we can, you know, better tackle that or reduce people's bias, or kind of, you know?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? Because I think there is, right? It's tough, right? Because many times those biases are in situations where maybe we're not in positions of power, or we are in the minority. And so we don't feel altogether comfortable to talk to people about things. But I think getting to know the people who have those biases, who seem to have those biases. You know, a long time ago, I remember making friends with somebody who had quite strong opinions about certain social things that were in opposition to actually the person that I am. But we got to talking to one another, and over time of talking to one another, this person was like, oh wow, you know what? I really didn't know, you know, I thought that because this person was making assumptions based on not knowing a certain group of people, right? So if you feel like there are people who seem biased, the best way to overcome their bias is to get them to know you, right?
Yeah.
And it seems like kind of like, well, I don't want them to get to know me because they're making me feel bad. But honestly, only when they get to know you and understand you are they going to change their minds. Are they going to change their stereotypes, right? Because they're operating from a position of stereotyping. So I hate to say that. I mean, one of the things that I hate about this is I feel like I'm saying to you, you do the work. And in a way I kind of am, because you are engaging in rational thinking and they're not, right? So you kind of, if they aren't becoming aware, then somehow or other, you're going to have to do the work for them.
Yeah. Thank you.
So yeah, hard part is when they're like 95% come to fruition, even as reported by others, for the positive or the negative, a gift or a curse, right? Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's a gift, sometimes it's curse. The same biases that can land us in trouble can sometimes be like this pessimism bias, right? Pessimism bias, if we can look into the future and we can see that it's going to be difficult for us to achieve things, that pessimism bias can help us to make sure that we do all the things we need to do to succeed. But that same bias can be the thing that stops us even trying. So yeah, this kind of, it's not good, it's not bad, it's how we respond to our biases that matter. And Ali is saying we have to advocate for each other. Yes, we do. If we find ourselves in positions and we are more comfortable and we are more able, because by virtue of a position, like for myself, right, I'm an associate professor, I am more able to advocate for my PhD students or for colleagues who are pre-tenure or something, then they may feel to advocate for themselves. And so yeah, we have, if we are aware, if we have some, we're in a position to do something, then we have a responsibility, because the workplace culture is not, it's all of us we're all involved in it, right? It's not separate to who we are. The culture that we have here at WSU, that's not separate from any one of us who's here, right? We're all part of it. So we all have a responsibility to each other and not just to ourselves.
Perfect. Does anyone else have any questions? I don't see anyone else in the chat. Okay, great. Well, Michelle, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. And thank you everyone for your questions too. That was perfect.
Well, thank you all. I mean, I really appreciated the opportunity. It was a lot of fun and great to, apart from anything else, great to share my my Lancashire accent with you all.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.